Hi, this is chapter 99, and I want to call it Militarism as a Priority because I'm going to make a particular pitch in this segment. Many of you are already friends of mine working on the Project Save the World, where our goal is to find ways of reducing the risk of 6 of the most important global threats. That is, threats that could wipe out 1 billion people or so in a short order. So we're not dealing with chronic problems like poverty and malnutrition in general, or the other human problems that have plagued humankind since the beginning, but 6 particular threats that could be very, very devastating to the whole population. They are war and weapons, especially nuclear, global warming, famine, pandemics, major radiation exposure through something like a meltdown or a reactor explosion, and cyber attacks. And sometimes we have to do all of these. We have to handle them all because they're all really, really dangerous, and they're interdependent. So it's really smart to address them as a package. And it doesn't even make sense to say which is the one that we want to put the highest priority to. But in a way, there is. We want to see if there's a way of leveraging things, that if we address things in a particular order, or not necessarily sequential order, but different priority, that we might get more mileage from our efforts and our investments. And I want to take the position, which is going to be controversial, I think, that probably the most promising overall approach is to take militarism, that is, war and weapons, the second or the first of our planks in our global issues, to take that as the primary one, because I think it has very important impact on the others that we should pay attention to. And that's going to be my argument. The question is now, how dangerous are these 6 global threats? We can't really predict exactly. We had thought that famine was a thing of the past. It almost it was eliminated for a while, but it's back now in Yemen and Sudan and places. And we see that there's a real prospect that it may become more common again. And the thing is that it's likely to kill millions of people at a whack, and maybe 1 billion if you at the outside, but probably not more than that. It's hard to guess, but maybe the worst famine on record was in Russia, when about 1/3 of the subjects of the Tsar Godunov, died of the famine. So if we took 1/3 of the human population, well, that'd be pretty bad. Anyway, let's go on. How about pandemics? Well, that's could be pretty bad. We have a history of something like the Black Death or the flu. And in World War I, the flu killed about 5% of the world's population, and infected 500 million people. And if we look at the Black Death, that was estimated to have killed between 30 and 60% of Europe's total population. And in total, the plague may have reduced the world's population from an estimated 450 million in those days down to 350 or a little more million in the 14th century. Well, that would be about eliminating about 22% of the world's population by that estimate. So we have a pretty good example of how bad things could get. And it is, although we think we're on top of things with our medical care today, that we still are not ready for the next big one. And there are more contacts with animals as we clear the jungles and have more contacts, and then the air travel and so on. So it makes us very susceptible, and the people who are worried about pandemics, I think Bill Gates recently said that he thought that was the most threatening danger to humankind now. Whether he knows is your expert, I don't know. Now, what about massive radiation exposure? Well, I don't know. And if we had a meltdown, which neither Fukushima nor Chernobyl were the worst that could be. The worst would be a meltdown or a big explosion of the whole shebang. As I understand it, the Fukushima reactors have only leaked or emitted about 5% of the radiation that they contained. And we know that that's a pretty scary thing and very risky and dangerous to us all. So imagine that a direct hit by a nuclear attack or something right on one of those reactors, what that would do, where something would release the whole amount of radioactivity in the reactor. Well, it really would be a threat to all of humankind. Oh, I think some of us would survive, but it would be a big one. And when we come to cyber attacks, it's pretty hard to estimate. I just don't know. That depends on what you count. If somebody hacks into the ICBMs and launches one and starts a nuclear war, then of course all the estimates based on warfare would kick in. But and if they do something like knock out the electric grid for North America or something, they could make pretty big impact. Billion people, I don't know, but it's not going to be fun. Okay, but now we have the last two are war and weapons, especially nuclear, and that one is really a threat. That's bigger, I think, in terms of risk than all of the others, or not probability risk. I don't know about that. It's bad, but the main thing is that it's extremely serious because it really could end civilization. The number of people who would be killed by a major nuclear war is unthinkable. And then we talk about global warming. Now, clearly war and weapons, that is militarism, global warming are the two big ones, because global warming may indeed extinguish most of life on the planet, and not just human life. There have been previous big extinctions where I think one of them actually eliminated something like 95% of all the life forms on the planet. And I won't go into the reasons for it, but we're getting warnings that are not too favorable. So I think that clearly we have to do all of these things, and we must absolutely must handle both global warming and nuclear war, and more generally militarism on the whole, which I mean wars in general and weaponry, the maintenance of weaponry. And I think, as between the two, that probably militarism is the key one, because for three reasons. One is that war and weapons, that is militarism, can indeed affect causally global warming. We have a large amount of emissions that come from the very existence of these weapons. And the second reason is, on the other hand, nobody uses global warming as a weapon. So, nobody even wants to increase global warming. We're working as hard as we can, or maybe not as hard as we should, to reduce global warming, but nobody's in favor of it. And on the other hand, the other four global threats can all be weaponized. That's not to say they're inherently weapons, but they can be made into weapons of war. And therefore, that's why I think we have to look at militarism as a major factor, because it has we can use all the others as components of it. As I mentioned, the very existence of weaponry, whether even in peacetime, it has to be looked upon as a danger for global warming, because even producing tanks and bombs and bombers and whatever, building them creates emissions of CO2, and it's a misuse of resources that should be diverted to other places. And in general, it has a significant effect on global warming. I don't know how to calculate the amount. I don't know that anybody's done that, but I do have an interesting figure that someone pointed out to me. Larry Brilliant said that 40% of the Pentagon's budget for overseas operations, the American operations, military ones overseas, 40% of that budget is spent just on the transportation of fuel for the troops to use overseas to run the war. So, you just spend that huge amount of money just to transport the fuel. Well, of course, that emits CO2 right there, the transportation, and then you get over there and then you use it and you burn it. What kind of a budget is that? A huge budget in the Pentagon, and it's going for that kind of thing. You have to say, the Pentagon is clearly the biggest emitter of CO2, and the user of fuel, fossil fuels of any operation or any organization anywhere. And besides the effect of militarism on global warming, and on all these other things, which I'll tell you more about in a minute, just the expense of maintaining the military, quite apart even if we don't have a war, just the expense of maintaining it keeps us from spending the money on things that we absolutely need to address. So that is one of the other factors that we have to take into account when looking at the impact of these various dangers. So I would say militarism is a key thing that we need to pay attention to. If we handled that, it sure get a lot easier to handle all the rest of things. Now, what do I mean by militarism? It's defined as the belief or desire of a government or a people that a state should maintain a strong military capability and use it aggressively to expand national interests and or values. It also may imply the glorification of the military and the ideals of a professional military class and the predominance of the armed forces in the administration or policy of the state. A long-winded thing. It just means glorifying war and weapons and believing that they are very, very essential and take priority in the budget of any nation's economy. Well, but now let's go beyond this classical kind of definition of military or militarism, because the question is, what is a weapon? If we're going to maintain these weapons, we know the war is militarism, clearly, and the production and maintenance of weaponry is also militarism. But there are a lot of things that I would call weapons that haven't traditionally been considered that. And indeed, all four of these other threats themselves can be made into weapons and used as weapons. Militarism, for example, creates famine and uses famine as a weapon of war. In fact, nowadays, the only famines that have existed in a while have been ones that are not the result of bad weather or bad technology or any misfortune of inadequate agriculture or bad markets. No. Famines nowadays are entirely caused intentionally as weapons of war, as violations of the human rights of an enemy population. So militarism makes famine into a very important tool, as it is right now in Yemen and in Sudan. Now onward, militarism can use pandemics as a weapon of war. That's not to say all pandemics are weapons of war, but there's such a thing as biological warfare. And the use of these, certainly many countries have built arsenals of biological weapons, viruses, and so on. The most obvious ones have been anthrax, Rift Valley fever, Ebola, Marburg, Japanese encephalitis, and yellow fever. Those have all been not maybe used in weapons as weapons of war, but they've been created to be used as such. I hope they're all gone. We have treaties about them now, but the point is, yes, you can have other kinds of all kinds of things can be epidemics or pandemics. I would call smoking a pandemic, and that's not used as a weapon of war. It's a business deal, trying to promote people's ill health as a way of making money. But at any rate, all of these can be. Now, militarism, now let's move on to militarism causing and using radiation exposure as weapons. Well, after all, the first reactors, the only reactors initially, were built for the purpose of war. They built them for the Manhattan Project. And then they went on creating more and more reactors to produce plutonium so that they could produce more and more nuclear bombs. And the intention was not to originally, not to use them for energy. They had to think up, they were going to build these reactors to produce the plutonium, and I guess they figured out maybe they could also get some energy out of them for heat and electricity and so on. So that's what they started doing, but it wasn't the purpose originally. It began, and it is still maintained largely for the sake of producing plutonium and other fissile materials for war. And if we had a war, certainly radiation exposure is a real danger that it might be used as a weapon. A direct hit on a reactor catastrophe. As I understand it, only 5% of the content of the Fukushima reactor has been released yet and is in the environment. Well, suppose there were a suicide bomber that hit a reactor like Fukushima and released the whole darn thing. 5% it has already put the fear of God in us, I bet, but not, imagine the rest. It is a catastrophe, and that is definitely something it could be. And even people using the idea of a dirty bomb, they would try to go around and find up some depleted sources and put them together and make a nasty bomb just to do it something locally. So all of these things are possible to be used as weapons of war. Finally, militarism can also use cyber attacks, obviously, as weapons of war. We know that for sure. In fact, it's almost taken for granted that the main likely use of a cyber attack would not be to extort money out of somebody, although there's certainly banks are having their money stolen from them every day, and corporations and so on, and even your bank account might be. So cyber attacks can do damage that's private. But we worry more about what would happen if an enemy or a terrorist group or some other force decided to hit our electric grid and knock it out. Or worse yet, to launch one of our ICBMs. And as I understand it, it cannot be excluded that this is a possibility, that ICBMs can be hacked into and launched without the, so to speak, permission of the owners. Well, those are clearly ways in which cyber attacks can ruin an enemy, injure an enemy, and be used in war. But there are more ambiguous ways in which I would call it a cyber attack. For example, if you could hack into another country's election and cause the wrong guy to be elected, your fellow to be elected president of a country that I will not even speculate about, I would call that an act of war. But certainly it would be a use of cyber attacks as a weapon. And would you call that a weapon of war? I would, but, very definitely it's a question. Okay, so in all of these ways, these six threats can all be made into uses of weapons, to be made into weapons for military uses or warfare. But in addition to these direct catastrophic effects of all of them, we have to look at the price of militarism, the price of maintaining military establishments, and of course, the price of running a war. That is stupendous. But even without war, or with or without war, it has figured nowadays that global spending in the year 2017 was $1.7 trillion, according to SIPRI, Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Now, what would we do with $1.7 trillion if we decided to divert it into something like the Sustainable Development Goals? The best estimate made by the United Nations of how much we would need to spend to succeed with the global goals for saving the world's poorest population and implementing the SDGs is $1.4 trillion a year. So we would be able to do the SDGs and have money left over if we simply diverted all of our military expenditures into constructive things. Although, in fact, the SDGs are not the only problem we have to deal with. We have to do more. We're going to have to put in much more money, additional expenditures, especially for global warming, because although it's in the long run, it's going to be a saving. According to the book Drawdown, we would come out ahead financially. It's a good investment to make the shift over to technologies and ways of living that actually reduce global warming. We'd come out ahead financially. It's a good investment, but that's a longer term investment because up front, somebody has to actually put some money in, and then you eventually and rather quickly get your money back. You can make your money back in just a few years, but up front, you're going to need some big bucks. And sometimes, and that's the only way we'll be able to achieve these transformations that are required to prevent global warming from the catastrophe that we have to worry about. So the only place I know where you can get the kind of money to do the Sustainable Development Goals and the transformation of our world into a sustainable development and sustainable energy and reducing global warming. The only place to do that is to divert the expenses of the military. Okay, then I'm going to propose, let's all get behind the idea of let's have all of our governments, every government in the world, reduce its military by, let's say, not 100% right away, but let's just say 80%. That would be great. And I think you can see why we would all benefit from that. But we have to ask, well, what would this demilitarization look like? How would the world function without a military or with a much reduced military? And could this be made into a realistic objective? Well, I'm going to have to argue for that there are things that we would have to do to make it feasible or attractive enough to pass, get any support. I think I like the term sustainable common security. That is the alternative to militarism. And if you want to look at it, our platform for survival includes sustainable common security as one of the enabling measures, one of our planks. Go have a look at what sustainable common security amounts to. But you're going to have objections for sure. You're going to have people say, no, 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 we couldn't possibly do without our military. Well, what are they going to complain about? And let's address them one by one. First is, of course, they're going to say we'd lose jobs. The first thing you do, even we've got this already when the talk has been going on about cutting off the sale of military equipment to the Saudis because of their bad behavior. The U.S. and Canada alike have said, oh my goodness, we have so many jobs at stake. All these people manufacturing military equipment would be laid off, or what would we do with them? Okay, that is one of the things that we would have to handle. And I think if you look at our platform for survival, we have an answer to that. We are going to have a universal basic income guaranteed to everybody anyway. And if only because of the fact that automation is going to be undermining the jobs that exist now. So that's already a platform plank that's going to be necessary. And the jobs from demilitarization would be covered by this universal basic income. But you'd have investors, banks, corporations, et cetera, say, oh no, we don't like that idea. And you have to show that they can actually make money by investing in other things, and that's not hard to do. But also, we have one of the planks on our platform for survival that says these corporations should be made more accountable. Because if the public has decided, the citizens have decided that they want to demilitarize, the corporations are not going to be in a position to stop them if we have a more democratic system. So we think that every corporation should be made more democratic and accountable. And there are many ways of doing this. One would be, and I favor this, that every big corporation should be required to appoint to its board of directors people representing various other civil society concerns. Panels, civil society organizations would get together and nominate people representing their concerns to create a panel and have it vetted that they are good people. And then the corporations would have to appoint them to a certain proportion of them, 10, 20% of the board of directors should have to be constituted of these people representing public interest. And there is, by the way, a method by which the United Nations already vets civil society organizations that want to affiliate with the UN and participate there. We could use the methods that they use, or even turn the job over to United Nations to decide which civil society organizations deserve to be represented on these panels, whether they're panels of environmentalists or panels of consumers or panels of feminists or people who are worried about public health, any number of things that may need to be represented in the corporations. Finally, not finally, but onward. What else will people object to? Of course, the most obvious thing, people will say, well, we need our army to defend us. Suppose our next door neighbor or some other enemy attacks us. We have to have a military for self-defense. Well, we've thought of that. Our platform for survival includes a proposal that the United Nations Emergency Peace Service be created, which would be under the control of the UN and would be ready at any moment to go and intervene to protect any country that is actually under attack or looks like it's about to be attacked. And it's not just military. They would have some military component, as, for example, a police force would have. But they would also do things like mediation and various other kinds of non-military interventions to resolve the conflicts that they are encountering. But then people say, you want us to turn our security over to the United Nations and hope the UN is going to defend us if we're attacked by our neighbor? Fat chance. I mean, look who runs the United Nations. It's the P5. The very countries that own nuclear weapons or owned in the beginning are the countries that actually make all the decisions and have a veto in the Security Council. And if you want to have a UN emergency peace service, that's going to be dispatched and under the control of the Security Council. And you want me to trust them? No, thank you. I don't trust the Security Council because of this veto power. Okay, so we have a proposal that we need to invoke at this moment to say, yeah, we've heard of this problem. It's occurred to other people too. And what we think would be a useful thing is to create a Parliamentary Assembly at the United Nations in which all countries are represented. And this would be in a position to override the Security Council veto. That may take some doing, getting the override, but the growth of truly democratic representation in the United Nations is the way to go. And it is the way we will achieve a greater democratization of world government. Now, I want to suggest that this whole thing be addressed as a package. There's no point in going out and saying, let's just ask our countries to get rid of our militaries or even cut it by 80%. That's just not going to happen unless we have, at the same time, addressed all of the concerns that they have, and many of them are quite realistic and reasonable. So I would say, if you have a look at the Platform for Survival and see if these don't add up to a combination of proposals that go a long way toward reducing the threat of various kinds of global catastrophes. And let's begin by and put our highest priority on the reduction of militarism around the world. So, thanks. Bye.